subject on the line. What's your best evidence for Christianity? With your host, Shannon Q, and featured guest, Paulogia. Welcome to The Line.
I'm so excited. Hi, everybody. Woo. Welcome to The Line. I am super excited tonight because we have a dreamboat as our co-host this evening. We have Paulogia. Paul, say hi to everybody. Tell them
hey, everybody.
Where they can find you. Tell them what's up with you before I get into it. Who you are, for those who are silly enough not to know.
My name is Paul, and I have a YouTube channel called Paulogia. And there I am a former Christian. I was one for a long time, many decades, but I'm now a former Christian. So my channel is looking at the claims of Christians from this perspective. Cool. And so, my name's on the screen there.
That's right. For anybody who doesn't know me, hi, I am Shannon Q. I am one of the co-hosts of The Line, and I also have a YouTube channel called Shannon Q. And tonight we are going to be taking calls to find out what your best evidence is for Christianity. So the mods on the channels that this is streaming to right now should be hopefully putting the phone number in the description. The lines are open, so you can call us at any time. I am really, really, really excited for some calls to come through for Paul. I've been anticipating this for a while. How do you feel about it, Paul? Are you excited? How do you feel? Like what
I'm excited. I am normally, for those of you who know me, I am normally a cartoon. I am not normally interacting live with people. So this is going to be, again, I'm excited. I don't normally get to talk to the audience like this. So, and hopefully people will call in with something that makes me think, that makes me, at least challenges my status as former Christian.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. So what type of call do you think would be ideal for you? Like, what do you think would challenge you the most in regards to these calls while we're waiting for people to call in?
I'm not looking necessarily to be challenged. I mean, although, obviously, I guess if someone thinks, that there's something, a lot of people seem to think that if I'm a former Christian, then I never was one, or that I was perhaps the wrong kind. For those of you who don't know, I was raised Mennonite, and I was involved with a few other evangelical denominations before my departure. I have spoken with Catholics who think that if I was a Catholic, I would still be one, and I've spoken to Anglicans, and many denominations all have different emphases and different theology and all that kind of stuff. So perhaps there is something I've overlooked.
All right. Well, right now we don't have any challengers on the line. I'm a little bit surprised. Usually we have somebody who's ready and up for the challenge. So I think for a little bit, we'll just have a chat about what you've encountered before that you haven't found to be wanting, here's a better question. What would be a compelling argument? Like, what would be proof to you? That's interesting to me.
I would have to say that I borrow this from Mr. Dillahunty, Matt, who often goes, I'm not actually sure what would convince me, but if there was a God, he would know. And if that God wants me to get to know him, that God knows the level of evidence or the type of interaction that would be required, and could easily provide it, I would say. So at this point, I kind of feel like the ball is largely in God's court. I have read every book that's been handed to me. I have listened to lecture after lecture from every apologist, all down the line, and I've done my own personal devotion. While I was still a Christian, my last weeks and months were spent on my knees in prayer, wanting desperately for it to be true, hoping that it all would. So I feel like I've done all the steps that were required of me, at least,
Okay.
Though,
so William Lane
obviously-
Craig was wrong. Is that what you're saying? When he said that you had a brain dead Christian faith? That was my favorite.
Perhaps he was right.
William Lane Craig smack talked you.
He did. He didn't like that I was a cartoon. I'm not quite sure why that's a problem. So here I am today, face to face, if that helps in any way. Perhaps God can't see through a cartoon. Yes. And William Lane Craig didn't necessarily respect my path, partially because I was a young Earth creationist, for those who don't know. Up until several years ago, I believed everything that Kent Hovind and the Ken Hams of the world would have said. So the fact that was the first domino to fall for me seems to be a problem for some Christians who don't hold to that young Earth creation view, because they don't think that should have been a domino at all. Rather than falling and tipping everything over, they feel like I should have just picked up that domino and set it aside, rather than let me think about the fact that, well, what does that have to do with historical Adam? And Jesus and Paul both believed in historical Adam, so can I believe that? And it looks like the gospel writers were anonymous, not eyewitnesses. And it looks like Paul only wrote about half the books that most people think that Paul wrote, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Moses probably didn't exist. All these kind of things that, as I dug into them, it's not as simple as my first video, which says Ken Ham made me an atheist, because obviously I was looking to hopefully have a few people subscribe and click.
I know.
So anyway,
we're all subject to clickbait. We do have a caller on the line, and this caller's name is CJ, and CJ is from New York and has so much evidence that it would take too long. So we're going to bring CJ in. So CJ's coming on. Hi, CJ. Can you hear us? Welcome to the line.
Hey, what's up, people?
Hi.
Hey, CJ.
How y'all doing? Y'all having a good day?
Doing
We're
all
having
right.
a great day. You're talking to Shannon Q and Paulogia.
Okay.
Paul's going to probably be doing more of the talking than me, because I'm fascinated to listen. So what's your best evidence for Christianity?
Okay, here. I want you to go online real quick. I want you to look up a verse. It's in Genesis 6. It's Genesis 6:4. I can just say it out loud, honestly.
Yeah,
There
go
were
ahead
giants
while I'm
in the earth
looking
in
it up.
those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and bare children to them. Basically, what it's saying is that the angels had sex with women, and the women gave birth to giants. Okay, now I'm going to ask you this simple question. Do giants exist?
So,
Hello?
you're talking, I love this passage, the Nephilim passage. I think it's great. Do giants exist? Well, if you're talking about taller than average Homo sapiens, absolutely.
I'm talking about literal 30-foot giants, 100-foot giants.
If you're talking about something in the hominid species, like something that we would recognize as humanoid, then no, I don't believe that anything 30-foot tall within our family has existed.
Okay, well then, you guys are completely wrong, because there's literal video evidence of it. The bodies are all over the earth. And if anyone wants to see them, you can just watch a video. It's called Noah's Titans Before the Flood. So I'm going to say it again. Noah's Titans Before the Flood. You can YouTube
But CJ,
it.
that's not evidence, so you have to... CJ, I'm sorry, I know there's a little bit of a lag.
The bodies are all over. The bodies are all over. They're in picture. And anyone can literally go pay and travel to these areas.
CJ, I'm going to
CJ, what?
There's one in Sardinia if we do. I know there's a bit of a lag.
I know there's another one in Africa.
CJ, can you answer me a few questions? I have a few questions about this. So, I mean, obviously, we're all aware of videos. You probably think that I put out videos that have false information, if you've seen any of my videos, or you probably have seen videos that didn't work for you, and you've probably seen Photoshop pictures that, of Bat Boy or whomever, right? So videos alone serve as some level of evidence, but I guess I'm wondering what level of confirmation did you go through personally before deciding that the video was showing accurate information?
There was a heart found inside one of the giants that died in the flood, and there's blood being found inside of them to this day right now.
Okay. But
ever since,
is this stuff that you
I think
saw
around
in your
2015,
documentary, though, CJ?
I think around 2015, 2016 is when they started finding blood inside of these things.
CJ,
yeah.
What did you personally do to verify? So you're talking about one source at this point. What did you personally do to confirm what this source was describing to you?
Oh, what did I do? What did I do?
What did you personally,
you go online, you ask questions. There's a geologist.
So, okay, so
I can't.
So
what's his name again? There we go. Mud Fossil University. He's an actual geologist. He actually went to go check these things out himself.
And you spoke to Mark?
He has several videos on this, and it was very interesting to look at, because at first I was questioning it, and then the more I looked into it, the more I realized, okay, this is becoming real. This is true.
I'm going to stop both Paul and CJ for a second.
Hundreds of bodies all over.
Please 1 second, because even if I accept everything that you just said, like even if I say, okay, there were giants, right? I don't think there were. I think that you maybe have a little bit of a lower bar to accepting evidence as you perceive it than maybe is recommended. But even if I accepted that, that's not evidence that the Bible is true, that Christianity is true. That would simply be evidence.
No. That's evidence that religion is true, because the Bible isn't the only one talking about giants. We have the Sumerians, we have the Greeks, we have the Norse. If I'm correct, even the Quran speaks about giants in some way, shape, or form.
So that would just be evidence that people made
a variety of different religions. Vedic Sanskrit also speaks about giants. So this is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that just the Bible isn't true. I'm saying that ancient religion is telling a true story. And this is all one event. This is all one event written from different points of view. And if anyone wants to see the bodies, I told you, just go online, Noah's Titans before the flood. You can see it for yourself. Now, for the Red Sea crossing of Moses that the guy was talking about, he said Moses was fake. And I'm laughing at that. I'm laughing at it. Because anyone can go to the Red Sea and spend a few $1,000s, go underwater, and you'll find the chariots.
So
the chariots are underwater. They're right there. Ron Wally found it. So it really happened. God literally opened up the sea, the Red Sea, and then he freaking drowned all the Pharaoh and the rest of them. So it's like, okay, this really happened. Not just that, there's a pillar in commemoration from King Solomon. There's a literal pillar in commemoration.
Right. So, CJ, I'm aware of all of those claims.
Sorry. Okay, CJ, I muted you for just a second. The reason that I muted you is because there's a lot to unpack there, and we need to give Paul an opportunity to talk. So I'm going to unmute you in a moment, but just let Paul talk and address you with the questions, okay? Because there's a lot to unpack there. Okay, you're going to be unmuted in a moment. Paul, go ahead.
So I guess I would just very briefly start with the fact that, yes, obviously, even if there were giants, as Shannon said, that doesn't necessarily speak to the events of any ancient religion that you're speaking of. That would just speak to an affirmation that that species did exist. As for the things you're talking about, the Red Sea, the Dead Sea, the Red Sea, the crossing, those I'm hoping that you have looked at, and hope everyone, when they see a claim that they like to affirm, have looked at what the counters to those are, because the chariot wheels that have been found, which were not necessarily chariot wheels, they were wooden, they're of the wrong era, and they looked like they were planted hundreds of years, like way after the events of the Bible. They just look like wheels that are down there. I guess my question, CJ, would return to, were you skeptical about these claims? Did you in any way, other than watching more videos from the same people, did you in any way attempt to affirm that these things were true? And did you in any way, again, look at the opposite side? Did you look at what the other people who say that this is ridiculous, many Christians have come out and said that this particular, and I forget the name, I wish I could remember the name of the individual. I want to say Morris, but it's not quite right. Also claims to have found the Ark, for example. He claims to have found all kinds of things and made money off the tourism of this, but has yet to get other Christians to buy into the fact they're real.
I'll answer the question. As for the Red Sea crossing, I do believe it. I do believe those are the chariots. As for the counter arguments, at this point, it's kind of getting old. You know, people want to say, oh, it's from a different time, it's from this, it's from that. Okay, you can't prove it, and I can't prove it. But what we can prove is that there's chariots under there. Okay,
no,
so that leaves the option
look at the material that it's made of.
Now, as for the Ark, I don't believe they found the Ark because they have the wrong measurement of the Ark. You know that Kent Hovind Ark thing that they have?
Yeah.
Ken Ham.
Ken Ham one, you mean?
He's acutely aware of the Ken Ham arc, CJ. he's very aware, very aware of the Ken Ham arc.
Yes.
Paul knows all about it.
Okay, well, that arc, you know how they say it's like 400 something feet long or something like that, or 300, something like that? That is the wrong size of the arc. The arc was way bigger.
Well, it depends on your definition of cubit, because of course, cubit was, as you know, from your elbow to your hand, right? So it's a non-standard measurement.
Not like the two measurements we have right now is 18 to 21 inches. Okay, that's our cubit. But the cubit of the past was probably 25 to 30 inches, maybe even more than that. So we're talking about the arc being. Hold on, let me finish. We're talking about the arc being 750 to 900 feet long. So this arc that they have over there, it's nice. And, you know, it's a nice thing to do, but it's inaccurate. It's completely inaccurate. The ark was just huge.
Okay. So I guess your evidence for is the thing that brought you to Christianity, archaeological evidence like this? Is that what brought you, or why do you personally believe?
Oh, no. Me? Why do I believe? Okay, I was starting to believe in God, and then You look, you're not going to believe me. I'm sorry, but you're just not.
Okay, so it was a personal experience of sort?
Huh?
It was a personal experience of sorts.
Well, yeah, it's a personal experience, but it wasn't like I saw a vision and I saw God and this. No, it was the exact opposite. I was attacked by something invisible. I was literally attacked. It was slamming my head against the wall and tossing and slamming my hand and head into the wall. I was attacked by something invisible. And the only thing that helped me was when I screamed out for God. I screamed out for Christ. I was all like, Christ, help me. Because I didn't know what was attacking me. It was just something was in my room. So, yeah, you see those movies where something invisible attacks someone? Yeah.
There's really like the Invisible Man right now? Okay.
So that's disconcerting to me because that sounds like you maybe had a psychological event. Like, did you seek help after that took place?
No. I just prayed in the name of Christ, and it stopped. And then from there, that's when I pretty much gave my life to Christ. Okay, that
sounds like you had an acute psychological event, though.
An angel came into my room, and everything went well. And no, it was a terrible experience. Okay.
Okay.
I understand that, and I respect that. If something like that happens again, I hope it doesn't ever happen again to you. It would be my preference that you seek medical assistance, perhaps get an MRI to make sure that you haven't had, some sort of traumatic neurological event. Like that's concerning to me. So I hope you're okay. I very much hope you're okay.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm fine.
Like it would be scary.
I'm fine now, but
okay. I'm glad you're fine. I am glad you're fine. That's important.
But
I'm also.
How do I say this? What solidified me completely 100%? What solidified me completely 100% on God? One, besides that event, flat Earth. Once I saw that rocket hit the dome.
Oh, dear Lord, no.
Once I saw the rocket hit the dome.
No, CJ, you're not kidding. You're kidding. CJ, is this a joke? No. Are you kidding, CJ?
No, I'm not.
CJ.
No, I'm not
CJ?
at all whatsoever.
No, I don't.
There's several rockets that have hit the dome. It's on video. It's not just one.
CJ, you really need to stop just believing things that you see on videos. CJ, the world is not flat.
Okay, here. How about this? How about let's do a little test, okay? I'll do a little test for you, okay, Shannon? Okay?
I can't even believe this is happening right now.
No. Because you guys seem to think you're so smart, but I'm gonna test you on something.
I don't think I'm particularly clever at all, actually, CJ. But that's a lot to take in. Since you've come on the line, you've said that there's been giants, and that an invisible specter attacked you, and that the wheels that they found can't be dated, which they very clearly can, based on the materials. Like, we have lots of dating methods based on the materials that are used that we can utilize to date. And now that they've potentially found the Ark, and you finished it off in grand style with a rocket hit the firmament of the dome, and that the Earth is flat, and that's CJ. That's more than the trifecta. That is a lot.
Okay, here. I want you to
broadened dramatically.
That happens on this Earth. I want you to explain. I've seen this in real life. Where I lived in New York, it happened in real life. Okay. Because I lived in the area. Okay. But you can go on YouTube and look it up. I was there during that moment. So this isn't like some fake video of someone editing. I was there.
Okay.
There was 2 suns in the sky. There was literally 2 suns in the sky. Now, I want you to explain it on your model of the Earth, your ball. Why is there 2 suns on your ball? Because I can explain it on my model.
CJ. There weren't 2 suns in the sky.
Well, I know there weren't 2 suns, but it's on video. I saw it in real life, so did everyone else in New York. So why did everyone else in New York see 2 suns?
Everyone in New York saw 2 suns in the sky? CJ, I don't think that happened. I feel like that's something that would...
I have good friends who live in New York.
So let me ask, do you know why there was 2 suns in the sky? Just say yes or no.
Because there weren't.
What year was this?
There were not allegedly 2 suns in the sky.
I know there weren't, but explain why it happened. Why it looked like there was 2 suns in the sky.
We're not accepting your claim that it did happen. So it's not like we want to posit naturalistic explanations until we are convinced in some way that it happened. You're going against me and all of New York. We're talking about all of New York saw this. What year was this, CJ?
So,
what year was this?
I have friends in New Jersey who saw it too. So you're going against 2 whole states.
What year was this? When did this take place, CJ? Let's verify the claim. This is a good exercise, actually. We'll walk through verifying the claim. Like, what year, what day did this take place that people saw? Because it sounds like it could potentially be some sort of optical illusion.
I was a teen at the time, so probably like early 2000s, somewhere around that time.
I was very frequently in New York in the early 2000s, and I have a lot of friends who lived there. And while I was there several times a year. No one ever mentioned to me there being 2 suns in the sky. So your claim that everyone in New York saw it seems suspicious. Do you care to...
Okay, so I'm making a claim that pretty much the majority, probably, because everyone's going to look up eventually, someone's going to look up and be like, hey, why are there 2 suns in this? It looks weird. So people are going to question all these things. And, people came up with all these different things. But I'm going to explain why there was 2 suns during that time. I'm going to explain why there was 2 suns during that time.
Okay, I don't really care about the explanation until
yours is a ball.
No, CJ, I don't care actually about your explanation.
I can't believe this is happening.
So also,
let me explain. See, on your model, yours is a ball spinning through space. Okay, yours is a ball spinning through space. There's no way you can have 2 suns. Sorry, there's no way you can have 2 suns on your model. See, on my model...
CJ, I'm going to mute you again. I got to mute you again, CJ. I'm sorry. I have to mute you again because it's becoming incredibly overwhelming. You're throwing a lot of information out. When I unmute you, we're gonna kind of finish off because there's other people waiting on the line. But that's I just Googled it very quickly just to let you know, and it didn't show. If everybody in New York saw it, you would think that it would show up in a Google search. The only thing that I found is that recently there was a high school student that saw this happened in 2020, that saw something through their telescope and helped to discover a planet that had two suns, like way off in the distance, and they're verifying it through NASA right now. That's the only thing that I found. But yeah, I'm going to unmute you. Paul, do you have anything to say before I unmute CJ?
I guess all I want to say, hopefully the point of today's show was for people to be able to convince myself and Shannon in the audience that Christianity is true. And to be bringing forth a claim, you'd have to, I don't really care about the explanation until I believe that the claim is true. And so far, the things that have been listed off have been rather unconvincing and pointing to a YouTube video in general. I would hope that people, and this is the problem, I believed so many things on authority when I was a believer. I just, there's an authority and there's an authority, and I just accepted it. It was taking even one step to verify the information myself kind of made it all unravel. And that I'm disappointed with CJ that he basically said, I'm tired of these things being debunked. That's so tiresome. Well, that's not tiresome. That's how we come to truth, is by challenging these things. So the fact that CJ, I'm sorry, but you keep telling me that you accept these things, you accept these things, you accept these things. And when I ask what you did to verify them, you said, I don't want, basically, if I heard you correctly, you don't want to bother verifying these things. So that is not going to be great evidence for someone like myself or someone like Shannon. And so I would, I guess I'm at this point, CJ, thank you for calling. I really hope that you would do something to verify these claims. And I am going to talk to my dozens of friends in New York tonight and put out a notice to see if anyone is aware of these two suns. But given that I spent a lot of time in New York at that time of the calendar, I'm skeptical.
And CJ, I'm sorry I muted you a couple times. It's just that you tend to go on. I can tell that you're very enthusiastic about these conversations.
Yeah, I know.
It was very interesting.
It
was very interesting to talk to you.
Much. I literally have so much. Like,
I very much appreciate you calling.
I can even more stuff.
Well, call back again sometime, because you're.
And let us know what you did to verify these things.
And stick to one.
Right, well, let me just say one last thing. Okay.
Okay. Sure.
No. I want everyone to watch it. Everyone in the chat, everyone who's listening, go to Noah's Titans before the flood. Watch the videos. The bodies are everywhere. He flooded the earth for a reason. It wasn't just because we were being bad. There was something going on. And guess what?
Okay.
All right.
He protected us. That's why he flooded the earth, not because he's an asshole.
All right. Well, thank you, CJ. I'm going to let you go. Have a good day. Thank you. And I want anybody who does watch that movie to go through the steps of verifying the claims don't just take them on face value. People can present things as compelling, and that goes for everything that Paul says and everything that I say as well in our videos, on our channels. If you watch us, one of the things that I always say is advocate for your own understanding. So don't just take anything on face value or authority. So if you do watch that video, please, for the love of whatever, please verify the claims.
Of yourself.
Find us, engage in some source methodology. We now have like a pile of callers. Apparently that got people excited. So the next caller that we have on I'm excited to get to our third caller that's on the line actually here too. So the next caller is Juan, who is calling from Colombia. Juan is non-religious, and he'd like to talk about his perspective on religion in his country and the evidence that people he knows have used. So Juan, welcome to On the Line. Thank you for calling. It's nice to meet you. I'm Shannon, and this is Paul. What would you like to talk about today? Can you hear us, Juan? Juan, we have you. Hello, I heard you momentarily. Are you there?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, good. Okay,
Hi.
Perfect. What would you like to talk about, Juan?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can now. Thank you.
I was maybe just thinking that it would be. Hello?
Oh, Juan, your connection is really poor. I'm so sorry, but I don't know if we'll be able to keep you on the line. It's very difficult to hear you. Can you give it one more try?
Hello? Is it working?
That's
yes,
a
I
little
can
better.
hear you now. Yeah, you want to give it another try, Juan? Oh no, I'm so sorry, Juan. We're gonna have to let you go.
Hello.
Maybe hang up and call back in, Juan.
Yeah, maybe hang up and try again, Juan, please and thank you. I'm so sorry. What a sin.
I was going to say from a landline, but I don't know if they make landlines anymore. Do they make landlines?
They do. I don't have one personally, but I've heard that there's people that do have them. All right, so the next caller is Objectively Dan, the host of Truth Wanted from the ACA. Hey. And wants Paul and Shannon's take on people using their personal experience as evidence, and also takes offense to us saying that giants don't exist because Dan does in fact exist.
That's right. That's right.
I tried to cover that.
Melvie, you're denying the facts. All right, giants are real, and when I die, future scientists will say the same thing. So, shame on you guys.
And 2 suns and flat Earth. That was a lot to do. Though I'm not even sure what to do with myself right now. But yeah, sure.
You
Dan,
are,
go
as far
ahead.
as you know, a Homo sapien, though, Dan, right?
Whether I count as a Homo sapien or not, some may disagree.
Okay, that's for science to
determine.
determine. Okay, well, all right, fair.
I have to do some DNA, some Ancestry.com to kind of figure that out because I don't know for sure. But I wanted to ask you guys about what you guys thought people kind of justify their living experience or just the way they grow up as part of their beliefs. Because in my experience, when I talk to people on my show, Truth Wanted, live at 7 p.m. Central Time, anyway, that's Fridays, by the way. So when I talk to people, I had this call last Friday that said, I'm a Christian because I grew up Christian, and everybody around me is a Christian. And so I asked, okay, well, do you think that's something that you should think about, that other people, that this isn't something that everybody believes. So, why do you believe it? Why do you believe because of your community? And I had a tough time getting an answer out of it, and I realized there's almost 2 kinds of Christians, kind of broadly speaking, right? There's Christians that kind of grew up almost like the way Paul did, where evidence was a really big deal and was put upon them basically as a child growing up, that these are the evidences that you talk about. And then there are Christians where evidence just isn't a big deal. You kind of just accept the claims on face value. And Christianity is more of a life stance. It's kind of how you live your life, how to be a good person and stuff like that. And I grew up more in the latter than the former. I kind of had a belief of the noma, the non-overlapping magisteria. And I think there's other people that kind of figure that way too, that science and religion don't often mix, or that the truth of the actual claims of Christianity really don't matter. It's just more about being a good person. So, my question is, what's your experience with that? How do you talk to people about that? And yeah, just what do you think?
So are these 2 separate questions? Or are you asking about, so you mentioned 2 different things. You mentioned personal experience, and you also mentioned being raised that way. Are those 2 separate questions, or are they one question?
So I guess, because personal experience to me is just a way of saying, hey, this is the way I grew up. This is I've had time in prayer, stuff like that. It's not the same kinds of evidences that, say, an apologetics might bring about. We're not talking about historical flood stories or stuff like that. It's almost a different category. But I guess, yeah, they are kind of 2 different things in the sense that one is talking about personal experience, one is just talking about, the way I grew up. But yeah, how do you deal with personal experiences, and how do you deal with folks who just don't care about whether it's true or not? They just like it.
Do you want to start with this one, Shannon?
Sure. Okay, so when it comes to personal experience, it all depends on how they're utilizing it. I understand how personal experience could be compelling to the individual who had that experience. When they utilize it as evidence for something, I try to impart to them all of the reasons why that's not going to be compelling to somebody who didn't have that experience. One of the other things that I like to do when people are utilizing personal experience, if I have the opportunity, I didn't really have with CJ, that was a lot all at once. But anyway, if I'm talking to somebody who's not, rapid fire, I like to get them to analyze their state of mind, do some introspective work to find out if maybe they had primed based on their sociocultural background or their religious experience in order to have that experience couched in a certain light for interpretation, so that the likelihood they would have experienced any sort of misperception as a religious experience is relatively high in those instances, because you have the internal schemas already built with anticipation that those experiences are likely to happen, do happen, and that when something happens, your internal cognitive framework is already set to embed it in that light. Like you're not looking at it with a tabula rasa, with a blank slate. You're seeking affirmation. So I work to try to push people towards understanding things like that. The second part of the question, I guess I'll throw to Paulogia, because I think that the first part was more interesting to the way that I approach things. So what do you think, Paul?
Yeah, so several things swirling. So, I mean, one of the things that I struggled with at the end of my time as a Christian was how do I account for my own personal experiences? Because I felt like there were many times in my life when the Holy Spirit was directly dealing with me. And I had to go back and think about exactly what Shannon just said. But then I started feeling very convicted because I spent not many decades, but I spent a little while as a youth leader. And I know that like what we ended up doing as a youth leader is we would deliberately, get kids away from their parents, for overnight type things. And you'd schedule things way late into the night, and they would be on they would be not nutrition the way they normally would. They'd be giving them junk food and candy and pop and all that kind of stuff, soda, depending where you live. And then you start priming them and you start playing very emotional music, and like late at night, it's easy to elicit those altar calls from, teens when you've put their mind, you've set them up to experience things that they don't normally experience because you put them in this weird state. And I also thought about things like when I felt like God help me find something, or God help me on a test. And like when I would stop and pray, and then I realized, probably what I was doing when I was stopping and praying was literally stopping my busyness and focusing and breathing for a minute, and that, in and of itself, did that calm me down enough that I could then turn to the task that I was trying to accomplish and focus on it better. So, I'm not saying that's the true of everyone's experiences, but as I started looking back on the ones that I felt, my baptism, for example, was just this incredibly heightened emotional experience, probably the most significant spiritual experience of my life. But I realized like all my family and all my friends were there, and it was this big deal that was culminating, and you go from this cold water to the hot air in the church. Like it was all these various things. So anyway, all that aside, I think similar to CJ, I just think that people should give themselves a minute to evaluate, was there possibly something else going on during these experiences? To like being raised in it, I follow J. Warner Wallace a lot. And if you're a Christian, you probably know who a cold case detective is. And he recently has been putting out, his message has largely been, in evangelism, his advice is don't give people your personal experience, because he came out of, most of his step siblings are Mormons, and they all have the exact same thing. They were raised in it. They feel the burning of the bosom. And every Muslim you talk to, and in Scientology, they all have, well, I was raised in this, and I had some kind of feeling or emotion that affirmed that it is correct. Well, then you're just asking someone to evaluate the exact same feelings and emotions from different people. So, like in that way, I kind of agree with the cold case detective there that probably it's not a great way to convert someone. Now, my last caveat number 3 is, Shannon asked me at the top of the show what might best convince me. And honestly, I do think that God's best shot at bringing me back is some kind of personal experience. I think some kind of Damascus Road situation where God reveals himself directly to me is his best shot. But that said, that would not be evidence for anyone else. It would only be evidence for me. Like that wouldn't be good enough. No one should believe me that God experienced it. There should be highly dubious, as I should be. But so there's all those things. I think being raised in it is a bad reason to believe. I think being raised in it is a bad evangelical tool, but experiencing things seems better than the evidence at this point. I don't know, Dan, does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so. It's funny because I tell people, hey, look, if God called into the show, if they called in Truth Wanted and made something happen, that'd be pretty cool. That would be evidence I would count. But of course, that hasn't happened yet. It's interesting, Paul, because, not yet, but I'm open to it. But anyway, it's interesting, Paul, because I didn't encounter, like, J. Warner Wallace, some of these guys, like, that wasn't a part of my Christian narrative growing up. Again, it was just like this idea of, look, this is the truth. You already have the truth. It's what you do with the truth. And you can either accept Jesus in your heart or you can reject it, because the truth is still going to be there. And it was almost a different kind of pressure. It was like a pressure it was a peer pressure, really, to follow this group's things, because this group, the Christian group, right, is more moral than everybody else. They know a lot of things. They know this Bible better than you do. And so I had this pressure to conform. And I think that there's a lot of people who do the same thing. They may not know about all the same kinds of evidences or apologetics that some other Christians do, but it's just the result of a kind of peer pressure that people believe. And I think that's interesting, but I also think it makes it harder to have conversations with folks because the substance of their beliefs is not something that is easy to talk about. Like, personal experiences are so hard to talk about because of the verification behind that, right, is almost impossible, as you guys know, and as you guys just found out with the last caller. So, really difficult stuff, but interesting.
Sure did. All right, Dan, we have to let you go. There's a queue, but it's nice to talk to you, and I can't wait to see you in June in Austin at the Faithless Forum. I can't wait to see you again. Bye, Dan. Everybody tune in Truth Wanted.
Bye, guys. See you later.
Bye.
Later.
Bye.
Bye. All right. Oh, the next call I'm very excited for. We are going to talk to Michael from Twin Cities. And Michael is a Christian. And I can't wait for him to talk to you because the evidence of living tissue found in dinosaur fossils and how things can't be as old as scientists say. And I can smell Mary Schweitzer and I'm pumped. How you doing, Michael?
Yeah, as you guessed, it's Mary Schweitzer. Hello.
Nice to meet you. So, what's your best evidence for Christianity, sir?
Well, aside from historical cases for the resurrection, which I wasn't all that interested in talking about because I like big giant lizards.
All right.
I find that
so does Paul.
The evidence for dinosaurs is particularly interesting. And the living tissue that was found in a number of different dinosaur bones, first dug up by Mary Schweitzer in 2005 with a T-Rex bone that was broken in half because of the size as it was being transported. And they found living tissue, that being red blood cells and collagen, which both decay pretty rapidly and leans itself more towards fossils being closer to 4,000 years old as opposed to 65 million. So,
okay. Can I ask you a few questions about that?
Go for it.
So you listed blood cells and collagen. Well, first of all, you are calling them living. You're calling it living tissue. Now, I have read a lot of these studies and done a lot of these videos on this topic, and I've interviewed Mary. So
have you? Okay.
You were calling it. Yeah. She's been on my show, so you can check that out. So you called them living tissue. Do you believe that's the accurate phrasing? Was it alive?
I wouldn't be entirely confident of that. From the way I've heard it, it's that the tissue itself was still structurally intact, not that it was still producing anything. If we want to use the definition of living as something that keeps on reproducing, it can't reproduce anymore, but the fact that it is still survived, so I guess we should maybe call it surviving tissue.
Okay.
That might be a better term.
Have you, this is, an evidence that you're really excited about. So have you done I'm going to ask you some more questions. Have you done some research on this, on the soft tissue? young Earth creation is typically called soft tissue, that which might be a phrase, but I don't actually agree that is a good phrase either. So you listed collagen and you listed blood cells. I'm going to come back to collagen for a second. So in your understanding, blood cells were found?
Yes.
Or what did Mary find? So
it was, as far as I understand it, it was that there were red blood cells that were still intact. At least some of the DNA and parts of it had been intact.
So, sorry. To the best of my knowledge, and I've interviewed Mary on this, no one has ever found dinosaur DNA, not even a little bit.
Okay.
Are you specifically aware of DNA being found? Or is that just what it resonated with you?
Not specifically. That's how I understood it. I definitely could have misunderstood what was said about it.
Okay. So now what Mary found, and the way she describes it, is she found iron in the shape of blood cells. Do you know are you aware of any evidence that would call it something other than iron in the shape of blood cells?
Not specifically, but I don't know that I've done quite enough research on this.
You're aware that iron is part of our blood, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And that you would expect maybe to find some iron deposits in a piece of rock, which fossils are.
So what Mary found and what everyone else has found since, when it comes to blood, is not actually blood. What they found is iron perfectly preserving the shape of blood cells. So it's not a big mystery why iron... sorry.
Right.
So it's not a big surprise that, so the vessels are separate, but the actual blood cells that people point to are literally just circles of iron. So that's not surprising. The collagen you spoke of, what do you know about collagen? What else in our body is made of collagen?
I'm not. It's more of a skin tissue, if I'm remembering correctly.
Not typically. So the things in our body made of collagen would be our hair. That's the most skin-like. But also our bones. And collagen, for example, is very prevalent in like antlers and all those things. Collagen is the longest lasting thing that we have. So our teeth has a lot more collagen than even our regular bones, if I remember correctly. And I was a young Earther up until recently, so everyone please forgive me when you're screaming that I'm getting a few things. But all that said, like collagen is also the least surprising thing to be still around because again, horns are made of that. Teeth are made of that. Our bones are highly collagenized. So when I hear young Earthers talk, and I don't want to use that. When I hear people talking about, this, and again, it's not living tissue. It's not even soft tissue. Collagen at this point is actually a very hard substance, but it's still biological residue. So you're not fully replaced. It is really exciting from a scientific standpoint that they found collagen. But what we don't necessarily expect is, like, collagen is the last thing to go on a body that we know about. So the fact that it still exists is in and of itself not amazing and not living. So, so given all that I've said there, what do you feel like you've investigated this enough to be confident that your understanding of living tissue in dinosaurs is a great evidence?
I would no, and I'm not going to bring it up again until I do some good enough researching to be able to justify it. So,
Michael, you're a star, Michael. Wow, that is a super honest answer and the right one too. Absolutely. So,
I definitely.
I know, if you can't make a justifiable claim,
that's awesome.
Then
okay.
Go look at Paul's videos, and there will be links to your video with Mary.
Yeah, or look into that interview.
Or pick a Christian source. Pick a or talk to Mary herself, who is a Christian. You probably are aware of that. She she doesn't have a horse in that race in terms of trying to make it old. She's just being honest about the science and saying, no, what I found was iron. No, what I found was this. And, and she had to literally to dissolve this stuff in acid for days and days before it even, got to the point where she could look at this stuff. So, research it more before you talk to someone, because that will make your case more compelling.
Yeah. And she's articulated that she's a little frustrated that her research is consistently misrepresented in order to make an argument. And I think you may have fallen victim to somebody you may have fallen victim to somebody, making a compelling argument using components that, in every lie there's a kernel of truth, right? So somebody may have been using components of her research findings to present it to you, framed in an inaccurate light in order to make the position. But don't take our word for it. Go look it up. I believe that the original interview on Steve McRae's channel, and
that
or on the Great Debate Community.
Or look at look at the separate things. Like she's been on BBC. She's been on all kinds of science journals. Look her up in Scholar. If you don't know scholar.google.com, everyone should know that site. And look up Mary Schweitzer, so you can read her actual papers in her words. So that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And we appreciate you. Do you have anything else? Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
All I was going to say is
nothing that I'd be confident enough to argue on in this particular concept. So, because I could talk about, Michael. Say, dinosaur legends, but we don't need to go there right now. But good talking with you. I'll look into this more.
Thank you.
And we'll see if we can get to the truth a little bit better.
All right. Have a great Sunday.
Awesome, Michael. I appreciate you. I respect that. Thank you for calling. All right. So now that was a great call. How'd you feel about that, Paul? When I saw that, I was like, oh my goodness, how's this going to go? Mike's fantastic. Good for Michael.
No, I'm very pleased that he's willing to go the step that I wasn't willing to go for far too long, which was to read the opposite side. So that's great.
Yeah, just take a step back and say, oh, okay, maybe I should look at it again. I have so much respect for that. That's fantastic. Good job, Michael. I hope Michael calls back at some point in time to let us all know what he found. All right, so our next call is going to be Dean, and Dean is from North Carolina, and Dean wants to talk about the Kalam, the cosmological argument. Hi, Dean, can you hear us? You're on the line.
Hey, I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Hey, Dean.
We can. Hi.
Hey,
is this Dean Meadows?
On, guys? Yes, it is.
Hi. How are you? Welcome. All right, let's talk about it.
If I'm lucky enough, I'll be able to visit Faithless Forum. I've gotten the okay that as long as I don't cause a disruption, which I'm not, I can.
Oh. No, I don't think you would. I'd be excited to see you and have a chat there.
So we'll see.
I probably will. Yeah. I'll definitely cause a ruckus everywhere I go. I'm a going concern.
Gotcha. So, can I ask a preliminary question before I talk about the Kalam?
Of course.
Yeah.
So earlier, Dan and Paul said that if there was a direct experience of God, that would be evidence for them personally. And I guess my question is, what would cause you to think that was actually God? Why wouldn't you say something like, man, I must have been hallucinating?
So I need to clarify if I was unclear. It would be evidence. I don't think for me it would be sufficient evidence. So it wouldn't automatically cross a line for me. I absolutely would get myself checked out if I was hearing voices. If I was, if I had
against a wall,
if I had my head bashed against the wall, if I had, vision. But that said, like on the Damascus Road, for example, like the first thing I would be doing is grabbing for my cell phone and trying to take a picture, right? And I would be looking to see if I would be looking to, because I'm me now, I would be going, like when the vision was over, I'd be running to see, well, are there footprints there where I saw the Jesus standing? And obviously that alone wouldn't tell me, that would just tell me something if there was. It wouldn't necessarily confirm if he wasn't, because Jesus could have been hovering above the ground or not, been in my mind in some other way. But so personal experience for me would be evidence, and I'm frustrated when people say things like there's no evidence for God, because there's evidence. It's just, is it sufficient evidence?
Gotcha.
Does that answer your question? It wouldn't be sufficient for me.
No, that answers my question, because I was curious as to, whether or not that would be like you said, like you clarified, sufficient for you or not. So my question is about the Kalam. I haven't watched. I don't know how many videos you've done on it. Have you done one video on it or two? I don't remember.
Well, it comes up repeatedly, so I have a couple dedicated.
Yeah, I think I've watched one of them.
I have one specifically from William and Craig. Yeah.
So I guess my question would be, obviously the third premise, the universe has a cause, is the conclusion of the argument. So I guess my question is, where do you disagree with the first two premises?
I think it would be beneficial for somebody to lay out the premises for anybody watching who maybe hasn't heard the argument.
Yeah, and just so that we're on the same page.
So
Dean, I know there's multiple versions.
The
Go ahead.
The first premise is whatever begins to exist has a cause. Sometimes he says sometimes what Craig says is whatever begins to exist has a cause of its existence. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause or has a cause of its existence, depending on which version.
Right. So I don't have a problem with the first. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. I'm okay with in the scope of our space-time. Like when we get beyond Planck time, when we get before the Big Bang, I feel like time is coherent, and you obviously need time for something to be causal, right? Like you need, if something, I disagree a little bit with Craig on this, is that he talks about simultaneous causes that are like, there's no difference there's no temporal difference between the cause and the effect. I feel like that's a little bit incoherent, begging the question, but we'll set that aside for a second. So I'm generally okay with the universe, whatever begins to exist as a cause. The second, where this really bothers me, is the universe began to exist, and they point to cosmology to say, well, look, Big Bang cosmology says that our universe began to exist. But what the theist is talking about generally is the cosmos. They're not talking about the universe, which is our instantiation of space-time, which generally scientists agree that our instantiation of space-time had a starting point. But that says literally nothing about whether we are embedded inside some other instantiation of space-time, or whether, like, what's outside of us. And so when you talk about the universe began to exist, yes, our universe began to exist, but that doesn't tell us anything about the general cosmos.
Gotcha. So I think that's probably a point where I would ask a question with regards to what you said, would be, so what evidence would you point at that would suggest that there is something outside of our space-time universe that would be classified as a cosmos? I mean, are we talking multiverse? Are we talking many worlds hypothesis? I mean, it seems to me like if we're going to say there's something outside of our universe and we're going to call this thing the cosmos, then it seems like we'd have to have evidence for this thing called the cosmos that's not our universe.
Right. So I'm going to give you two things. I'm going to give you my personal, what I think, based on nothing. And I'm also going to tell you, so I'll start with the second thing, which is what evidence do we have? We have no evidence for anything at all prior to the Planck time of the Big Bang. There's no, people have hypothesized possible ways to even collect evidence, but we don't have anything. We know less than nothing. We know nothing. We know nothing about what is outside of our instantiation of space-time, including one of the things that often, and you notice I never said matter in this. Everyone says matter began then. I actually don't believe that. What I have evidence for is that matter/energy cannot be created nor destroyed. That's a thing that is true about our universe. If one wants to extrapolate something to be true, why would someone insist that the singularity, didn't Like, that's not nothing. The singularity isn't nothing. The singularity is a thing outside of space-time, theoretically. So the evidence is, we have absolutely no evidence. My general argument with the Kalam is we can't say anything at all about what happened outside of our universe because we have no way of measuring it. So when someone posits something, just like I just would posit basically the idea that energy is eternal. I think energy is the brute fact. Other people think God is the brute fact. Me, with absolutely no evidence to back me, thinks that the idea that energy is the brute fact is very consistent with everything we've seen. I also think that God is very consistent with everything we've seen because God is non-falsifiable and it's this eternal idea. But because we know energy exists, that's one fewer assumption, right? We are aware of energy. We know that it can't be created and destroyed. So anyway, go ahead. I've been talking for a while. Go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, you've laid out a lot there. I'm going to try and move through it. So you've said we've little to nothing. We don't know anything about anything outside of our universe.
Correct.
And then you said, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that you're extrapolating that energy is eternal, and we don't have any evidence that energy is eternal. You think it's a brute fact. So my question then is, why is that not a faith position that energy is eternal if there's no evidence that it would be? It's just contained inside of our universe. Then if we posit two other things like causal finitism and the idea that actual infinites don't exist, then it seems to me then energy couldn't be eternal.
What is your understanding of the phrase? What is your understanding of the phrase brute fact? What do you understand the phrase brute fact to mean?
So I would say that brute fact is who was it? His name escapes me. He said the universe just is. It just is necessarily.
Right.
So
you understand that brute fact is
something that just is. It just is. Right. So without necessarily any explanation, it just is.
Right. That's generally the philosophical idea of a brute fact, is just something that has no further explanation. So when I get into these conversations, I don't talk about it as a faith position because I actually don't have faith in it. When I posit energy as a brute fact, I don't see any evidence that we do have.
Quick about faith. The way that I'm using faith in that sense is the classical definition that sometimes is posits towards faith is something you believe something without evidence for it. So that's what I mean.
Right, and that's
not that you believe.
And that's pretty much the So I'm with you. Anytime anyone says, "Oh, I think that's a brute fact," they are immediately saying to you, "I have no evidence for this. I'm just putting it forth as something that is consistent with the rest of what I see, but I don't have evidence for it itself." So basically, when people are saying that God is uncaused, they're saying God is a brute fact, and then I'm saying, okay, well, you have a brute fact of God, and I have a brute fact of energy, and neither of us have actual evidence for either.
Yeah.
So we are kind of in the same boat. I'm willing to get with you on that point.
I guess what I'm saying is I'm using the classical definition that's sometimes tossed out as faith. I personally don't think that faith is believing something without evidence, but that's a conversation for a different time. So what I'm asking. Do what?
Sorry, and I may have I just want to clarify that I may have misspoken. It wasn't without evidence. When a brute fact is something that has no further explanation, so I may have misspoke. So my apologies to the audience if I said that wrong.
That's fine. We're in agreement. We're in agreement there. So how do you posit energy as being eternal in light of something like Hawking's singularity theorem or the Borg-Usually-Vilenkin theorem that says, a universe that has been expanding on average of its existence must have a beginning, and they've even adjusted that towards, hey, even if there's a change in the equation of gravity, even if relativity is off, and this is what Vilenkin says in his book, many worlds in one. That even if relativity is off, this theorem would still hold true, that there has to be a beginning, or that there would be a beginning to the universe. That seems, any universe that's been expanding along its history, that seems to me like that's saying that energy is not eternal, but it's finite. It seems it's finite in its existence.
All I would say is that those theories apply to our universe, not to the general cosmos. And so if our energy, if we're talking about like a pool of energy that's eternal, I'm not necessarily saying our universe is using up all the energy. Anyway, so all this to say, to bring this back around, like the Kalam, to me, is there something about the Kalam you think I'm missing that convinces you?
I think, I don't. I guess I'm confused on how you're extrapolating to a greater cosmos outside of the universe when we don't have evidence for a greater.
Right, but I think anyone who says anything, all I'm going to say is anyone who says anything, whether it's a god or any other hypothesis, they're all in hypothesis land because we have no measurement outside of our space-time. And so maybe our space-time is all there is, or maybe we're part of a multiverse, or maybe we're part of we just don't know. So basically we're all just dealing with no evidence and positing things. Is that fair?
You would classify yourself as someone who is an empiricist, correct?
Generally, I don't think science is the only way to know things, if that's what you mean. Like, I'm not a scientist. Scientism. Okay. I consider myself a methodological naturalist in a way. Like, I'm open to the.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that clear?
No, that's.
And we do have to wind down soon because there's some other calls on the line and we don't have much time. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay, no, it's a fascinating conversation. I hate to cut it short. I'm so sorry.
I enjoy this conversation. I appreciate, Paul, and you guys just being open to having these types of dialogues. So let's just cap it there, Paul. Maybe next time, or we can exchange numbers or something and have a conversation about it. Or maybe I'll just come by Austin and they won't,
that'd be great.
Burn me to the stake, because I do weigh as much as a duck. So I'd be in trouble there.
Burn you. All right.
Yeah. So I'll see it if I can see it at Faceless Forum. Let's get together sometime either during it or outside of it, and let's chat about this. This is a great conversation. Thank you.
Sounds great. Or find me on Twitter. All that good.
Dean. Yep. All right. Bye. Thanks, Dean. Appreciate you.
All right. Take care, guys. All right. Bye.
Bye. All right. So our next caller doesn't have a name. It just says anonymous. Oh, it says they're from Nova Scotia.
It does.
That's cool. I know people from Nova Scotia. And St. Augustine's argument from truth is what this person would like to talk about. So, hello. Oh, is it Max? I'm so sorry. It said anonymous on what I was reading. I apologize.
It is Max. That's the pseudonym I gave, and it is anonymous. So it's both in a way. Ooh. And if I knew there was another Nova Scotian, I probably would have started with Barrett's Privateers or something as an introduction.
Oh, that's right, sociable. I got you, Max.
Thank you. All right. So just to get to the argument, it's found originally in St. Augustine's on free will, and basically from there he goes on to give 3 ideas of truth, and then from there he eliminates 2. He goes on to prove that truth exists in a way that's beyond or transcendent to the mind, and then from there he kind of deduces that truth is God himself. And that's generally his own process, but there's kind of a lot of philosophical coaching I need to do to kind of explain. Would you guys mind just giving me the mic for a bit? If that's all right. I know you guys are short on time.
Oh, we are short on time. Yeah, if you can give us a synopsis of what the argument is in like 2 minutes or less. I know that's probably a lot to ask, but yeah, because there's some other calls waiting. But I'm intrigued to hear this because it's not something I've heard before. So,
all right. So there are 3 main ideas of truth. So there are three main ideas of truth. The one is that truth is, in a sense, lesser than the mind, like it's some kind of construct that we make up. And the most charitable way to phrase it, it's like a helpful fiction. The second idea of truth is it's something equal to the mind, like it's just something we abstract from the reality around us. And from there on in, we phrase it in a way which is objective. And then the third way, it's kind of more transcendent or Platonic. It's something that's beyond and above the material world. It's not something that just exists in material objects and we just have an objective way of phrasing it. It even goes beyond that. So Augustine eliminates the first one, like the lower idea, that it's somehow a construct of some kind, by detailing that, look, we kind of have moral obligations based around truth. We kind of commit ourselves to it. When people search out for the truth, they find a commitment. I believe even atheists have their stories where it's like, I can no longer really hold to a religion I no longer believe is true. I have greater commitments to that than even some of my own family, to my own personal cost. So that would be one of the reasons why he pushes that one to the side. As for why it can't really be an objective means in changing reality, it's because there are truths that are about transcendentals themselves, things that themselves don't change. Think of truths about logic or mathematics. And then finally, he goes to truth is somehow transcendent to the mind. And because truth cannot change, and because reality itself shapes its way around being true, that is, reality is it's intelligible, it's comprehensible, you can understand it to a large extent, and even when you can't, there's at least the presumption that it is. So it's, in a sense, unchanging. Everything, the world around us changes according to it. And from there on in, we kind of get an unmoved mover. And because, of course, he previously alludes to the fact that, truth itself is, there's some kind of objective moral goodness to it. That's how you get to the source that it is a good onto itself. It doesn't have any source or root in achieving anything else, but it's a good onto itself. How was that for 2 minutes? I'm sorry if it wasn't
That's
good.
Fantastic.
So I have a few questions, because you were conflating a few things that I conforms to reality as adjudicated by predictive power. Okay. So things that make predictions about reality are the better the prediction, the more true it is. Is that incompatible with anything you just said?
Yeah, actually, that kind of hinges more along the second line of theories of truth, the ones that try to ground it in a kind of objective reality. I heard from an earlier call you were a materialist of some kind, maybe tentatively
I'm a methodological naturalist in my,
All right. So predictive ability would be more along the lines of justification, why you should believe in a premise rather than not believe in a premise. Like something could be true. The definition of truth,
right? But if it conforms to reality, that if something is true, it conforms to reality. Would you would agree with that, right?
Right.
Okay. And then I throw on the adjudication part because people are like, well, how do you know it's true? So I often just throw it on as part of it. I'm with you that that's a method, not a definition of truth itself. And then you also threw in there moral. So you threw in moral truths. I'm assuming that to you means, is that what I would call a moral fact?
Just to clarify what I mean, it's the belief that there is something which you ought to do. There are facts about what someone ought to do in terms of their behavior. Like you ought to conform yourself and believe in true things. Like that's at least one thing you'd have to believe if you were to buy into the moral dimension of truth.
Right. So that's where you and I are going to part.
Moral facts.
Okay.
Right.
Well, that's where you and I are actually going to part ways a bit, because I don't think that the word ought by itself has any kind of meaning. The word ought has to be tied to a goal. So if you want to win the race, you ought to run fast. But you ought to run fast doesn't hold without without the goal. So I don't actually, I am unconvinced at this point, maybe you can convince me. I am unconvinced that that there is such a thing as a moral fact. So when you were conflating moral truth there, because I don't think that there is such a thing as an ought unless we agree that there's a goal. So if we both agree that well-being of humanity is a goal we should have, then we can talk about whether, if that's our goal, then we ought to do A, B, and C. But absent an agreement of a goal, I think the word ought is generally meaningless. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It makes sense to me, yes. Since you threw 2 points, can I address them separately? One in terms of your definition of truth, and okay. So in terms of the definition, you kind of gave what's called a correspondence theory of truth, which is that the truth is that which corresponds to some facet of reality. I'm not saying, I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but I hope that's the general gist. So one thing you have to remember is this, in order to avoid issues of circularity for any definition of truth. When you say the word reality, you have to give an understanding of what reality is, whether or not it's materialistic, maybe it's idealistic, whatever. But once you coach that in, what is reality? Someone asks, okay, but is that true? And you say, yes, but then if you say that's true, your definition of truth kind of hinges on what you define reality to be. There's another objection I have to that,
okay, so can I just jump in there?
I want you to. Oh, yeah, of course. So that's what I want.
That's actually why I said as adjudicated by predictive power, because I don't even care what reality is. Like we could be in the Matrix right now, but as long as the thing that I believe, like for example, there's a door over there. Is there a door over there or not? Well, the answer is when I open it, can I leave the room? And if I stop being able to leave the room, then it's not there anymore. Like my prediction is, if there's a door, I can leave the room. And so as long as that continues to be true, I'm justified in saying there's a door there. So that's why predictive power to me is really important. So when you talk about all kinds of other truths, if they can't make predictions, and if we can't test those predictions against other predictions, then to me, this truth isn't that valuable.
All right.
Is that fair?
So, okay, I understand your argument. So my response there would be, and it's not really about whether or not one cares what reality is. It's so we have a starting point for discussion. In terms of coming to a definition of truth, if it's based on a definition of reality, then such a definition or even a justification has to be true. But if that's the case, then that kind of hinges back on what the definition is.
No, I don't need to define. I don't need to define reality. I don't need to define reality if my predictive power holds. Right? It doesn't matter if I'm the only mind, or if we all have. If I'm talking to other minds, and if we're in a simulation, or if there's actually material, and if there's supernatural, none of that matters if my adjudication is predictive power. Because I don't even need to, I don't have to have a justification for what's underneath it, as long as that's my scorecard. Does that make sense?
So you would be like, reality existing would be like a properly basic belief?
So properly basic beliefs are another thing in general that we could touch on if you want. But
yeah, that wasn't specifically what I meant, but.
Oh, no worries. But just to push it back one step, one could just make the same kind of objection towards your definition of predictive capacity, because what is predictability, and that itself has to be true, in which case the circularity kind of follows again, as far as I can see.
Sure,
and even scientists debate amongst themselves what qualifies as a good predictive test. So even that isn't cut and dry. Although even philosophers debate truth, so that doesn't help. But I hope you can see the point at least.
Yes, but for someone like me, it works incredibly well. And I will say that I absolutely am presupposing several things. I'm presupposing that is my third presupposition. I usually hold the one that the universe exists. My second presupposition is that it's we can learn about it, which means it's uniform. And the third is that I'm absolutely presupposing that a prediction, the better a prediction, the more true that is. I'm not in any way saying that I have justification for that, further than that I'm presupposing it because it works super well.
Right.
So, I'm not defending it.
Oh, okay. Just to clarify something, and I'm only saying this because I know this group of people tends to upset atheists. And to be fair, I can understand why
everything upsets us. We're crazy.
I just want. Hey. To be fair, I think both sides can have people who get upset easily, but presuppositional apologetics kind of gets under a lot of atheists' skin, especially if the presupper in question has very little background. So I really hope I'm not coming across as trying to promote that.
No, interesting.
Right. So in terms of properly basic beliefs, I could definitely understand why. I can definitely understand that viewpoint. So yeah, we kind of presuppose reality. We do presuppose the fact that we're not in the matrix and the fact that we can understand one another's language. I'm not trying to pull the wool under your feet and say that neither of you can't on an atheistic worldview. I think everyone has to start off with those presuppositions. My only point in this discussion is that in order to kind of avoid the point where properly basic beliefs tend to shift off one another for definition, is to start off with one that's a little more foundational than the others, and that would be in terms of understanding truth. And I would also say that my kind of model of knowledge isn't based off of properly basic beliefs, but I'm more of an intuitionist. I start off with ideas of seeming. So, for example, my mind sees the world in a certain way, and it seems to me the case. So, have you ever seen one of those optical illusions, like where there's two straight lines, and in one picture the arrows point outward, and in one the arrows point inward, and one line looks longer than the other, but in truth, both the middle lines are the same length.
No.
Yeah, that would be an example of a seeming. Now, it seems to me that one is longer than the other, and it doesn't. And I don't think I'm irrational when I fall for that kind of illusion. But
it's not even really a matter of falling for it. It's just the way that our perceptual processing centers are geared for, like, when. That's not the point of this conversation. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can therefore God therefore Christianity.
I know we're getting sidetracked, but this is a very good, interesting discussion on epistemology, so why not? My only point is, it seems that human beings are at least
Max, I'm so sorry. There's still a few other callers.
Oh, I know.
Do you have a thought there for Christianity?
Yeah.
No,
where are we getting to Christianity?
I guess. From establishing God's existence, I would kind of establish the existence of a Trinitarian God based off of mutual love, which is something Augustine does in another work. But
okay.
But if you have three other callers, then I wouldn't want to keep holding. And I quite enjoyed the call as was, even if we probably didn't get to all the points, if that's okay with you guys.
It's hard to get into deep philosophical conversations in a call that's like 10 minutes or less. And most of these conversations, to be fair, I mean, I'm not participating as much because I'm interested in hearing Paul do it. So, but a lot of these conversations, like I've said this before, and I'll say it a million times, you could essentially get me to maybe a deistic perspective, but ultimately, like, that, it seems meaningless to me. It just seems like you're adding another layer on to say, okay, well, this is what I can utilize as a foundation, because otherwise I don't have a good foundation and something might be circular. So I can utilize this to provide a foundation for this argument. And then, like, even if I do accept that, you still have a lot of work to do before you get me into, like, and it's a personal God, and he sent down Jesus, and it's triune. Like, there's still, like, I understand that the, like, laying down the foundation of saying, well, this is at least evidence that something might exist or something might be necessary. But even that, I think, is almost just like an extra step of comfort. Like, when we hit a wall, sometimes we say, well, this would explain that. Well, of course it would explain that, because it would explain everything, because essentially what God is at the end of these arguments is just a fix-all that ultimately explains everything. And then at that point in time, it doesn't explain anything to me either, because you can insert anything into that slot and just say it explains everything. And it does, because you said it explains everything.
Right. So, and I can understand that kind of objection. The kind of argument I usually make is a deductive one. I don't try to make one from explanatory power. It's rather that, look, if we know that, if we all agree that truth exists and we really do a conceptual analysis of it, then that does lead us to a belief in God, specifically a triune one. And of all the major world religions, Christianity seems to come the closest to that. So that's kind of where I was trying to get overall. Yeah. Okay. And that's a bit much to ask in a 15-minute call, but I appreciate all your patience.
I appreciate that so much. I enjoyed the discussion a lot. You and I are just, unfortunately, you didn't get me to accepting your definition of truth. So, I mean, if we pick it up again sometime, that's where we'll start.
Yeah.
Very well.
Cool.
And cheers, bye.
Thanks, Max.
Cheers, bye.
Cheers, bye. Cheers, bye.
Have a good one.
You too.
See you later, Max. Thanks, buddy.
Bye.
Love me some Nova Scotians. Max is great. That was an awesome conversation. I love listening to the philosophical chat. It helps me learn a lot too. So the next caller we have is going to be Derek in North Carolina. Derek, thank you so much for being patient. You've been on hold for a while. And Derek is a Christian and would like to talk about the fact that early Christians recorded the crucifixion. And this is a fave topic of yours, Paul, so I get to mostly listen again probably. Hi, Derek. Can you hear us? Welcome to the line.
Yeah. Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We can, and we're so excited. So what's your best evidence for Christianity, Derek?
Well, the one that I gave was the fact that Christians retain the account of Jesus being crucified by the Romans, which normally would be considered an embarrassment and be, seen as a defeat, not necessarily a victory.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that because Jesus was crucified and that was in some way embarrassing, the fact that stayed as part of the story means that the rest of it is true. Like there was definitely, if Jesus was resurrected or if Jesus was crucified, then there's definitely a resurrection, or what do you... I guess I'm not clear.
It sounds like he's saying that Christians, the fact that Jesus was crucified is embarrassing because I guess they caught him and killed him, and that's embarrassing. Okay. So they would Christians who were, or at least Jesus followers at the time, wouldn't have recorded a crucifixion because they wouldn't have wanted anybody to know that they got him because that's embarrassing. They would have, I guess, hid it or. So,
Derek, let me ask you.
Is that right?
So,
did I get that?
Well, yeah. Is that Shannon on the right track with what you're saying?
I think she is.
Okay,
cool.
So let me just ask this.
Paul knows this stuff and I don't.
All right, so just for the sake of this discussion, we're going to go with that there was a man named Jesus who existed. Sound cool?
Okay.
Okay, so and then for the sake of discussion, we're going to say that this Jesus was definitely executed under Pontius Pilate. Sound cool?
Yes.
Okay, so let's say my general position is that it's entirely possible, as I can see it, that that everything happened after that was a legend. So if you're going to form a legend, or not if you're consciously forming it, but if a tall tale grows and grows, if there was one historical element to it, it's pretty tough to yank. Would it not be very tough to yank out the one element that was historical, or are you somehow imagining that? Or are you basically arguing against Christianity being invented whole cloth?
Right. Yeah, I believe that there's enough evidence to say that Jesus was a historical figure, if nothing else. And there are definitely people who believe in, like the Christ myth theory, that he wasn't at all historical.
Sure.
And I don't think that early Jews would have gone out of their way to invent someone and then have him crucified in the story.
Okay, but let's say I'm granting you that. So so Jesus was a historical figure. and that Christianity was based upon him, and it was well known that he was crucified. It's not necessarily, I guess you understand that even if everything that happened after that was a legend, including the one historical detail that everyone was aware of, doesn't mean that people were including something that were the embarrassment factor doesn't come into play. Would you agree?
No, I definitely see where you're coming from. Absolutely.
Okay. So, and just because he was killed, I mean, that's the most mundane claim that we can make, right? So everyone in history died, which is usually why when I'm talking to someone about the resurrection, it's the first thing I grant. Okay, Jesus died, great, because everyone else also died. So is there something else to you that make it compelling, or should tell me that, what am I missing that says that this is not a legend after the death part?
Well, I was going to tie it into the experience of Paul, who was a avid persecutor of Christians, who had really no stake in the Jesus movement, so to speak, and then he, did a complete 180 and converted to Christianity, and talks about his experience. I just think that I don't know, I just don't know why he would have just completely made up, his experience.
So, you're aware that, you said that Paul didn't have a stake in Christianity, but I think we would agree from his own writing that he had a stake. He was definitely against it, right? Like, would you agree with me that Paul was a persecutor of the church and was, if not killing people, at least dragging them to jail and doing bad things to them, right?
Right.
Okay, so you're also aware of, in general, people can feel guilty about things, right? People can feel remorse, and generally, things can eat away in their mind. Like that's a thing you've experienced, I'm sure, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So, I guess, and then that actually lends through trauma, like soldiers, for example, who come home who felt while they were doing terrible things, they felt justified in doing them. But when they come back, they get what we call post-traumatic stress, right?
Correct.
So I guess one of the things that makes sense to me was that if there was someone actively persecuting the church who was doing the terrible things, if we accept him at his word that he was doing, that it seems entirely plausible that that he suffered some level of post-traumatic stress, and that his mind told him, you need to stop dragging these fellow Jews to jail and killing them and persecuting them. Does that seem at all plausible to you?
Absolutely. The main thing with that is, why wouldn't he have just, apologized and been tolerant to Christians while still not believing in Jesus and, remaining an Orthodox Jew? Why would he take on that belief, instead of just saying, what I did was wrong, I shouldn't have been persecuting Christians, but I still don't believe, that Jesus is the Messiah and all the rest.
Right, but you've encountered people who do very drastic 180s in their life, right? Like not everyone who leaves Christianity does what I do and creates a YouTube channel to talk about Christianity, right? Like a lot of them, like you described, they stop believing in Christianity and they kind of just live their lives and they never think about it again. But I think you would agree that some people do a 180 in their life. Like you can probably think of examples in your life where someone was all one way and then all the other way, right? Like you can probably think of examples.
Oh yeah.
Right?
So it does also sound like you had an acute psychiatric event as well. Sorry. I'm sorry. I like to talk sometimes too. I've been more quiet than I've ever been in my life probably today. But it also sounds like Paul, like a lot of people talk about hallucinations. It doesn't even necessarily need to be a hallucination. It sounds like he had an acute psychiatric break at some point in time. That could have been caused by the stress of, killing people that he knew were innocent. It could have been for any number of reasons. But as a result of potentially having post-traumatic stress or a high degree of guilt, this could have been something that occurred to, like, happened to him. Like, even within the Bible itself, it says that he perceived it and no one else around him did. So, like, even in his recounting, other people around him didn't actually perceive or hear or see the specter that appeared to him. It was solely appearing to him. Now, it would stand to reason that if you were experiencing a high degree of guilt due to, literally killing and persecuting innocent people who held this set of beliefs, after a buildup over a time, if that starts to weigh on you, you could have that type of event where, you just have a psychiatric break and you have a perception of having a perception of the Messiah of the people that you're persecuting. Could be an internal mechanism that's utilized to sort of expel that guilt and allow you to have the opportunity to essentially atone in an immediate fashion by being absolved by their Messiah. Like, there's a million reasons why this could have taken place from a psychological and cognitive perspective. Like, when you're looking at somebody having a neurological event. So it is all speculative, but it's just as likely that happened to me as it is, especially given the circumstances that Paul was in, then it would be that the literal Jesus appeared to him. No one else around him could see it. And you know what I mean? I don't know if any of that made sense. I speed a lot of it off quickly.
Right. So I guess, the reason I walked through all this was, like, you were saying, well, I can't think of a reason, or it seemed to me like you were saying, I can't think of a reason why Paul might have done it. And I guess we were just putting forth whether or not you accept it as a good reason. Do you kind of think that, that is a possible explanation?
Absolutely. And as a Christian, this is actually why I love this station, because it all comes from reason and science, which I do believe in, by the way.
Awesome.
Good.
Yeah, and look up. I would encourage you to look at 2 Corinthians 12, where Paul talks about his experience, and he specifically. I don't want to lead you too far, but he specifically talks about how he himself doesn't understand his own experience. So look at 2 Corinthians 12, and kind of maybe because the Acts descriptions which Shannon was referencing are absolutely correct. People weren't seeing it, but Paul, in his own words, describes it, and even he says he doesn't really know what's going on there. So for us to say concretely that we know is kind of putting words in his mouth that he didn't.
Oh, that's interesting too, because it could have been a retroactive construction for him to. Wow, that's interesting. I didn't realize that like when he recounted it. Yeah, because it could have been like we construct memories and we don't even realize that we're doing it. Like they've done a series of experiments on it. Like that's why eyewitness testimony is such garbage, because we construct memories based on our individual circumstances. Like when we perceive anything, like how our perceptions are processed is essentially like they go to the centers of the brain that are dedicated to those specific types of perceptions, like either temporal for sound or occipital for vision. And then they're sent up through our midbrain into our hippocampus, where they're essentially kind of compared against all of our previous, not only perceptions, but experiences and memories. And then our brain kind of constructs them through that comparison. So that's what deja vu is, for example. It's when you're simultaneously having a comparison experience while having your current experience. So you feel as though you're perceiving a memory in real time. It's a real random sort of misfire. I go off on tangents, but yeah, so that's interesting, because it could have been a retroactive reconstruction when he was trying to remember back to why he had these changes. It may not have even been something that happened to him in real time. It could just be that his internal justification that he was utilizing when he was reconstructing why he had come to the positions that he was currently holding. So that's interesting too. I ramble a lot. I find brains interesting. I'm sorry, Derek, but I do have to,
Derek,
let you go.
I hope we gave you something to think about. I appreciate that.
Definitely. Thank you so much for taking my call.
You're lovely to chat with. Thank you. Sorry I ramble so much. And we have one last caller, and our last caller is going to be Helen. And Helen is from North Carolina, and she's a Christian. And her evidence is that the Bible has been around for thousands of years. So it's like there's a great likelihood that it's true. So Helen, welcome to the line. I hope you can hear us. Let us know if you can.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You're quite quiet, though. If there's anything, you could turn it up a bit.
Go for it.
So I wanted to say that I don't think that the Bible could have been around for all these thousands of years unless it was supernatural.
Okay.
I'm going to need that to be expounded upon a little bit. So do you mean held to be true by people for thousands of years unless it was supernatural, or that the information was retained for that long? Can you extrapolate upon that for me?
Well, how could one book have endured for all these years unless it was by supernatural?
Do you think that there was just like a literal Bible, like a physical Bible that has existed and has just people have been adding to it, so it started with Genesis and that chapter was handed to the next person and the next person wrote the next chapter all the way up to the New Testament, and it was an actual physical object? Is that what you're saying?
Well, in its entirety, it could not have existed for this long without supernatural intervention.
But it didn't, though, Helen.
Well, Helen, do you think that the Bible is the oldest written document that we have?
That's a good question.
Yes.
Oh, honey, it's not.
Are you aware of books? Have you heard of the Iliad of Homer, for example?
Or the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Endured with all of these people adhering to it, though. For all the Iliad of Homer is not endured as long as the Bible.
Okay, so I guess that was my question. My question was more about, do you think that the Bible is the oldest document we have? So you acknowledge that we have writings from older than the Old Testament. That you would agree with that, correct?
Maybe, but a religion doesn't linger on for all these years based on a lot.
So how many years do you? So I think you would acknowledge with me that there are religions that are not true. Is that right? There are some religions are not true. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. So, for example, in your mind, what is the oldest religion that is currently practiced that is not true?
Oldest religion.
Or so. What are some examples? So, like Islam, for example, is not true in your mind, I'm assuming, right?
Right.
And we track Islam back to, if people are going to scream at me, it's like 400 AD, like it's in the third or fourth century, I believe. So it's like 1700 years old. And then we also have the practice
Hindu
of Buddhism.
Scriptures are
So Buddhism, for example, so those we track back to being like 5,000 years old. So people who are practicing Buddhists, have scriptures that are, or have documents that are roughly as old and has been practiced roughly the same amount of time as Christianity.
Hindus
so is that a good
3,000?
So
sorry,
I guess how many? So actually, Hinduism, for example, is older than Christianity. It's not older than the Old Testament, but it's older than Christianity. So for you, is that a good evidence that Hinduism is true? That it's really old?
Yeah, well, so the Old Testament has been around longer than Hinduism. It's true.
Okay, but let's say, for example, I currently hold, based on the dating that I accept, the Old Testament was actually compiled around 1700 BC, not centuries and centuries before that, which actually would make the Hindu scriptures slightly older. But let's just say so how many years? So let's say if we could push Hinduism back like 300 years, which would make it a tie.
The Rig Veda is about 5,000, give or take, years old. So 4.5.
So would that lend credence? Would that lend credence to Buddhism being true in your mind? Like if someone came to you and said you should practice Hinduism because it's super old, and people still adhere to it. In your mind, Helen, is that a good argument?
Well, no, because in Hinduism they have bride burning and sacrifice.
No, but I don't know if you heard me. It's really old, but your argument was that Christianity is true because it's really old, and it's been practiced for a long time. And so I guess I'm just asking if someone else came to you and said, "I want to show you this thing that's been practiced for a long time." In your mind, is that a good argument?
Well, Christianity is the only monotheistic religion, though.
You keep changing your criteria, though, Helen. Your criteria are changing. But so it sounds to me, in the very fact that you need to change your criteria as a response tells me that your original positing isn't a good argument, and that you must recognize that. Otherwise, you would stick to your guns instead of changing your criteria. So you must at least recognize that it being old and people adhering to it, it isn't a good argument for it. You recognize that, though, right? Irrespective of what other arguments you might have.
Well, I do recognize it in a certain sense.
Okay.
Cool.
So in your mind, it needs to be combined with other things. Go ahead.
I did have one other evidence for Christianity or the supernatural being true.
Sure. Yeah, sure. We have time for just a little bit more, so go right ahead.
When I was 9 years old, my sister and I saw all of the clothes fly out of our closet. They were just floating in the air for a time. When they started whirling around, I want to know how you would explain that. It's nothing supernatural. It's real.
Okay.
You and your
go ahead, Shannon.
Go ahead,
please. No,
I
please.
I would suggest that there's a likelihood that that's a retroactive reconstruction of a memory. There's a large likelihood that it didn't happen. Something similar to that may have happened through commiseration with your sister. You may have kind of rewoven the memory into each other's minds through time without even realizing that you've done it by external cooperation and implantation. So I would suggest that you maybe are having a potentially false recollection of that. But even if it wasn't, like it's not necessarily, like we went over this before, that's not going to be compelling to anybody else, even though I recognize that for you, it's very real and very compelling. But it's for anybody external of you, or potentially in this scenario, your sister, it's not going to be a compelling argument. And even if we grant that it did happen, it's still not evidence for Christianity. At the very least, or best, I would say it's evidence that, if you accept that it's a supernatural thing that happened, it's just evidence for a supernatural thing. It doesn't, you still need multiple steps in order to get to, therefore, God, and then therefore Christian God is even extra steps after that.
Yeah, and I hope, Helen, you understand that we're not in any way trying to say that you are making this story up, or that you like.
No.
I could fully grant that perhaps fully grant that to you this happened, and maybe it even did happen. I think what Shannon was helping to convey was that unfortunately we can't know that, and so for us, because we've heard so many people, and we are so aware of people's memories being faulty, and they genuinely believe what they're saying, but we can't know for sure whether it happened. It's tricky for us. So I would say the same thing. Like, so if someone from another religion told you about their demon possession from their religion, or told you about a supernatural event that happened to them from their religion, I think that you would probably, again, be suspect that if I was telling you, hey, I was around and my goat started talking to me, which is a claim I've heard before from voodoo doctors, that goats started talking. Like, I think if someone said, hey, Helen, how do you explain this goat talking? Your first instinct might be, rather than trying to explain it, you might say, oh, did a goat really talk, or is there something else going on here? Does that ring true to you? Is that probably how you would react?
No, I would believe because I know that demons are real.
Okay.
So
I recognize that as your perception. We do need to let you go though, Helen. We're encroaching upon 2 hours. Time flies when you're having fun. Helen,
but thank you for the call.
so much.
Okay.
Thank you. We appreciate you. Thank you for calling. Have a good rest of your evening, Helen. Thank you. All right. Wow. Oh my gosh, we accomplished so much there. How did you feel about that? Let's quick decompression.
I felt great because, well, I mean, I'm still not a Christian, so we can perhaps do this again, and it would still be fresh for me. But I was very excited that we were able to have some conversations where people went away thinking, well, I'm going to think about this in a different way. We didn't change anyone's minds either, but I think what the goal of all these conversations is what biases are we holding and identifying biases, and people were pushing back on me as to, are you a naturalist necessarily, and some of these things, and these are all things that I love the conversations. They're great. What did you think? It was
wonderful. I was very excited. It ran the gamut too, all the way from flat earth and giants to really interesting philosophical conversations to historicity, and I loved it. Every second of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure we may not have reached CJ. I'm not sure I hope CJ comes back and is willing to let me know how he validated a few things. But
I know. I don't think we reached
if it's
CJ.
on YouTube, it's true. That's what we've learned tonight, I guess. If it's on YouTube, it's true.
2 Suns and rocket ship. If you haven't watched this from the beginning, I would recommend you do it.
Also, yes, if any of you are from New York, I would love to hear about your 2 Sun experience, how that went for you, because everyone in New York experienced it. So,
oh my gosh. Well, we have to go, so I am going to bid everybody adieu. Next week, it will not be Paul and myself. It will be Jimmy back again. For those of you who are like, "Where's Jimmy? Where's Jimmy?" Jimmy will be back. You only have to tolerate me for today and probably some more times later, but you'll get used to it. I'll grow on you, I promise. And he's going to be with Bryce Blankenagel, whose name I probably butchered, and I'm really sorry if I did, Bryce, who is a host of the Naked Mormon podcast. So that should be exciting. And if you haven't already, if you're watching this on one of the other streaming channels, please go subscribe to The Line and follow The Line on Twitter. There's going to be lots more interesting conversations to be had. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Paulogia, for being the guest, and elevate the discourse, guys. See you later. Bye.